Almost everyone wants to be on the property ladder at the moment, but of those that aren't, 52%, over half, believe they never will own their own home. That is a horrifying statistic, and in this video we're going to talk about, number one, why is it so hard to get onto the property ladder to begin with? Two, top tips and advice to help you get onto the property ladder. And finally, three, what can the government do more of to help you get onto the property ladder to begin with? I really think this is an important issue because right now, 3/4 of retired households own their home outright, which is significant because it means they can live without mortgage costs or rental costs, or they can downsize and buy something else for cash and be left with a nice nest egg to live on. So if you're in my generation or a younger or even perhaps an older generation, how likely do you think it will be that you will own your home by the time you retire and importantly have paid it off in full? Before we get to part one, please like and subscribe because it helps me out. Part one. Why is it so hard to get on the property ladder? Look, we all know why. It's because it's got more expensive, but it's important you know the detail in that because it's not as straightforward as it seems. You're probably all used to seeing graphs like this one that shows the increase in average house prices over the years. It shows house prices climbing and climbing. It just seems like a mountain that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Yes, there are little blips here or there where it drops, but then it just keeps climbing. But in reality, this is house price growth relative to inflation, and for some reason, this isn't a graph we often see in the headlines, but in reality, it is a far more accurate representation of house prices relative to how valuable the pounds in your pocket actually are. Obviously, looking at this, it's clear that in general, prices have been rising. But real house prices are actually still lower than the highs pre the 2007-2008 global financial crisis. You never hear people say that relative to inflation, house prices are actually still lower than before the last financial crash. But what probably matters the most is mortgage payments as a percentage of your take-home pay. And you can see this is where things start to look more real and realistic to the situation we all face. What really matters isn't house prices. What really matters is relative to our income. How much of it are we having to spend on a mortgage? And that percentage is clearly rising and rising as it has done before every housing crash in the past. But look, let's try and look at the bigger picture for context. Here shows house prices as a multiple of average earnings from 1845 to the modern day. And what's interesting is that house prices were even more expensive in the later half of the 19th century. They then went on a multi-decade downward trend to earnings bottoming out after World War I, and now we can see they've been increasing ever since. But there are things that we can learn from this history that might actually point at the problem and the solution moving forward. Number one, between 1851 and 1911, there was a doubling of housing stock. It rose from 3.8 million to 8.9 million houses, and that significantly aided pushing down house prices as a multiple of average earnings, as you can see. Number two, smaller houses were being built. Before 1850, houses were generally significantly larger than those built after. So they were building significantly more, and they were all far smaller, probably helping them build more. And number three, average earnings significantly increased. So while average house prices fell 23% between 1845 and 1911, due in part to the significant increase in the housing being built, earnings actually rose 90% over the same period. So house prices basically dropped 0.4% a year for 66 years, and over the same period, average income increased 1.1% a year. We often think of corrections in prices or wages as massive events, but in reality, longer-term correction is so slow-moving, everyone adapts in real time. Interesting, isn't it? Part two, top tips and advice to help you get onto the property ladder to begin with. Now look, I'm hoping the previous section gave you a bit of a deeper context on the story of house prices, but how does that help you get on the property ladder to begin with? I'm going to share 4 top tips, and not to big myself up too much, but I do know a thing or two on this topic, given I've spent my career building a UK-wide home buying company, a national estate agency, and my own personal property portfolio. My companies have dealt with the sales of about 16,000 properties over the last 12 years, totaling about £3.2 billion of property. So let's get into those tips. Number one, open a leaser. Now, if you're a first-time buyer, you can save £4,000 a year into your lifetime ISA, and the government will top it up with a 25% bonus. So you can save £4,000 and you end up with £5,000. Two, research mortgages. 100% mortgages do exist if you have no deposit, but they're usually dependent on parents agreeing to keep a percentage of the purchase price in a separate savings account that's held with the mortgage lender. They'll still get interest on it. If your parents have savings tucked away for their retirement, this is a really smart way to help you on the housing ladder without them actually having to give you a single penny. If you've not got family that can help, the government reintroduced 95% mortgages. So there are a range of lenders that will offer you a mortgage with as little as a 5% deposit. And look, if you're not sure who to speak to about mortgages, I've put the link to my mortgage brokers below in the description. Number three, pay off any short-term debt. Things like credit card debt, car loans, using short-term finance through things like Clara can actually then affect how much you can borrow, because a lender will view those payments as recurring costs, which then reduce the amount you can borrow, affecting what you can buy. If you're trying to get on the housing ladder, you've got to get rid of the car on finance. For goodness sake, buy something more modest second-hand for cash. And four, improve your credit score. A better credit score usually means it's easier to get a mortgage at better rates. The easiest way to track and improve your credit score is simply to open an account through credit reference agencies like Experian or Equifax. And finally, five, save. I know this is boring, but there are no shortcuts. Choose what you want to save at the start of the month and spend whatever's left over. But look, I know we're all sat here frustrated with why house prices are what they are, and that life should be getting better through the generations, not worse. How do you think the government should be helping? Part three, what can the government do to help here? In my opinion, there are four things that are affecting affordability. They are the lack of supply, demand from abroad buyers, regional differences in prices, and population growth. So let's quickly look at each of those things. Lack of supply. It is projected there will be 250,000 extra households a year, every year till 2033. Yet the UK is only building 150 to 200,000 additional homes a year. We talked earlier about between 1851 and 1911 there being a massive increase in house building that led to a doubling of housing stock. And over that 66 years, house prices dropped 23%, leading to house prices as a multiple of earnings hitting an all-time low. The big problem we have now is 25% of all new homes are built by the three largest house builders, and about half are built by the top 10. So we're all relying on a small number of companies whose whole incentive is to maximise profits and reduce competition. In my view, we need a government-owned, not-for-profit home builder whose whole focus is to build a workforce that can build homes non-stop, sell them at market value to create competition, and reinvest all the profits to keep scaling the organisation. Not only would that act as a stabilising competitor in an industry that is dominated by a handful of companies, but it would keep a lid on excessive house prices rising and even slowly decrease them relative to inflation over time. It will put a big portion of the workforce to work. But how do we deal with the demand from abroad? It might surprise you that 20 to 30% of property bought in London is bought by international buyers. And whilst this is obviously a lot lower outside of London, in reality, in a market that already has limited supply, adding the competition overseas investors certainly isn't helpful to us trying to buy a home. The issue we have is if we restrict people buying from abroad too much, property prices in London in particular would start to drop, probably quite dramatically. There is already a 2% additional stamp duty land tax non-UK residents pay when buying a property, just like how you as an investor pay an additional 2% stamp duty when buying additional properties yourself. Perhaps that stamp duty should increase year by year to non-UK residents to passively make UK property a little less attractive each year to buyers abroad. What do you think? Then you've got regional differences in house prices and the fact our population is increasing year by year faster than the rate we're building homes. How do you think the government should be dealing with those issues? Should they be building better transport links, relocating government head offices out of London? And with population increase, what's the solution there? Because, to be honest, I think I'm maxed out on ideas. Whilst you consider that, I'll see you up here.